scratchy background noises.
Okay, we are now recording. Welcome to the District 5 monthly meeting, and Lois Ruby is going to be our speaker. I'll let Gretchen introduce her. But first, I have an announcement that as of our meeting in August, we will have a meet in person place. And we also will be doing hybrids so that for those who can't travel or are distant or simply don't want to come out in person, we'll be able to continue the Zoom. So,
Right.
and I will
Okay.
get
Where is it?
this week.
Where is it?
We'll have a board meeting this week.
To-
I'm working on a couple of places. I know that we have a room in Northwest Wichita reserved, but I'm also contacting Larksfield Place to see if we could get back in there. So we'll know next week. Okay, Gretchen, would you introduce Lois?
Sure. Make sure I'm on. Yes. Lois Ruby is a dear friend of mine and somebody whose work I have admired for many, many years. Can everybody else mute so that we don't?
I'm going to say mute. Let's mute.
Okay, everybody, Martha and Marilyn and or Connie, you can do that maybe. Just mute so we don't get feedback. Lois is a writer of immense depth and breadth. She writes about subjects as diverse as what was going on in the small Jewish community in Shanghai, China during World War II. And it's that powerful book called Shanghai Shadows. She writes about magical realism in Louisiana with a tree and the tree that has a history of relating to an enslaved woman and her journey. She writes about the Underground Railroad here in Kansas. She writes about personal issues that kids deal with. She writes about the Rosenberg children and what they went through. I mean, she can go on and tell you in her 23 books, published books, the diversity of subject matter is really absolutely amazing to me. And I have read, as I told her earlier, I've read probably 10 of them, and every one I have loved. So I would encourage you, I'm a great believer that fiction that is labeled a young adult fiction is often really adult fiction as well. So I'd encourage all of you to read Lois's books. Lois lived in Kansas for quite a long time. In the background, you can see her, the love of her life, and Thomas Ruby, who is a therapist here in Wichita. They moved to Albuquerque, lived there for quite a long time. She was on the selection committee for the National Book Awards at one point. Am I correct in that, Lois? Correct me if I'm wrong. Lois, are you hearing me? Yes, okay. She has, some of her titles have been adopted for use in school systems in a couple of states. I mean, she is sort of the epitome of what most of us who write would like to be in terms of a name and a name that stands for excellence and a way of being able to get into a larger distribution. So we're very fortunate today to have Lois with us. She's going to speak and then she's going to also entertain questions, and she has a few slides to share. So please use the chat to write any comments while Lois is speaking, and then we'll go back and look at those. Lois, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. I just want to show you the first slide there, and then we're not going to look at any other slides for a little while, but that's just so you know who I am and how to reach me if you want to. So Gretchen has set quite a task for me. When I read to my husband the email she sent me about what she thought I should be doing, he said, is this going to take like a week? Or is this an entire semester's course? And we thought a lot about it. And I want to try to reduce it to 45 minutes. And we will allow some time for questions. If you're interested, pop in anytime if you want to ask a question. And as Gretchen said, we'll do a writing prompt at the end of it. I want to start out with a little bit of formal stuff, and then we'll loosen up a lot after that. And I'm covering a lot of things. So if it's not, if we reach a piece of it that's not very relevant to you, just tune out and check back in a little while, and maybe you'll find something that is more meaningful for you. So here's the way I want to start out. If this were a 12-step meeting, I'd have to start out with, hi, my name is Lois, and I'm a wordaholic. And you'd all chirp, hi, Lois. And I'd admit I have a problem, and I'd tell you my sordid story, because let's face it, writing is an addiction. And writers have all the earmarks of an addicted personality. And here's some reasons why. We crave words. We crave the well-turned sentence and the dazzling metaphor. We crave blocks of time to make it all materialize on fine vellum. We sneak moments during our real jobs to gulp quantities of words and to capture and polish a brilliant idea before it goes poof into the miasma. We steal time from our families and friends to wallow in our own idiosyncratic mental floss. In fact, we'd rather be alone in a dark corner to feed our addiction than to, say, take a group of 4-year-olds to a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. We hide our work in bottom drawers or under stacks of unpaid bills or in the piano bench, so no one can stumble upon it, at least until we've been through about 20 revisions. Despite a time in rehab, such as a very nice vacation in Jamaica, we return to the same deliciously toxic environment and pick up our old habits, the craving, the sneaking, the stealing, the gulping, the hiding. We turn ourselves over to a higher power, which is to say, the editor, who has life and death control over our destinies. And therein lies the problem. Because among our cravings, the most gut-wrenching of them all is the compulsion to get published. Gretchen described me as a YA author, which I was in days of yore, but I no longer think of myself that way. And here's why. YA fiction today is much more gritty, more violent and dark, with deeply fantastic or occult elements that I'm no longer comfortable with. And teens more than middle grade children, which is actually the population that I write about now. They can see right through fakeness. I was once a youth group advisor and I once raised teenagers, but now I'm a grandmother of teenagers, and I cannot relate to the peculiar language and the digital lives of teenagers today. And now there's, of course, a greater emphasis on technology, and it grows ever more complex as the kids get older. And I'm not there yet. I'm too old to really get there in time, because as soon as I get anywhere, they're already 5 steps ahead. And then there's the whole concept of gender fluidity, non-binary characters, trans people. I'm okay with all that, but I can't write about it directly so that my story sounds authentic and feels real, because I don't have direct experience with people of this type. So I have to shy away from those things. And you will find in young adult literature today, it's almost impossible to see a novel that doesn't have a person with gender fluidity in it. And having said all that, what I do write is middle grade fiction, and some librarians and teachers consider that young adult or will recommend my books to young teens, because kids really want to read about people who are 2 years older than they are. So my stories, even though 10-year-olds may read them, often have 12 and 13, 14-year-old kids in the stories. And because I'm in my dotage and the grandmother of 7, I find myself growing more and more comfortable with historical fiction. In other words, pre-technology. I just happen to be very interested in history, so it's a lucky thing. And let me give you an example. You used to be able to write about a kid that got lost in the forest, and it could be very mysterious, and it could be like half the book trying to figure out how that kid's going to get out and if that kid's going to survive. But now everybody over the age of 10 has a phone. So they can call for help, or they can use their GPS to get to someplace safe. Or if all else fails, somebody can track their signal and find them in the forest. So to write about kids that are lost in the forest, you have to be able to explain why they don't have a phone, or the phone isn't working, or they're out of range. So you have to mess with all that stuff just to explain why they can't use their phone. So, that's kind of a mess. I want to talk about some practical matters, some things about marketing and agents. First of all, before I go any further, if you don't know about this, you should write it down right now. The best place to get information about agents is the Science Fiction Writers of America website. You may think, and I'll tell you more about that, it's www.sfwa.org. That's SF as in Frank, WA.org. And you might think, since you don't write science fiction or fantasy, whatever you write, it's not relevant to you. Let me tell you, this is the place to get the most important and complete information on how to select an agent, how to find an agent, how to vet an agent, how to be sure you aren't tangled up with somebody who's unscrupulous. I find this to be an invaluable resource, so be sure to look for it. Do you need an agent? Agents have a certain purpose. I would not have been able to get where I am with 22 or 23 books without an agent, but it has been a stormy relationship. It has not been easy at all. My first attempt to get an agent, I had the name of somebody, I can't remember where I got the name, but it sounded like a good source. And it made sense to me to go to New York to meet this person before I signed on with her. So her name was Charlotte Sheedy. This was, I don't know, 40 years ago. She's still working as an agent. I went to her apartment in New York. It was like on the, I don't know, 14th floor or something. And I had sent her the only book I'd had published at that point. I'd sent it to her in advance. She read it. When I got there, I said, you've read my book. Do you have any interest in representing me? And she said, and I can quote almost exactly, I read your book and all of your characters are ninnies and nerds. And I said, so I take that to mean you're not interested in representing me. And she said, oh no, I'll represent you. And I said, I don't think we're going to work together very well. So she did not become my agent. The next step in the process, any of you old enough to remember Alex Haley? Remember Alex Haley and Roots? Well, because my husband was the chairman of a lecture series in Wichita, we happened to have Alex Haley at our house for dinner right after Roots was on television. And my husband committed the greatest faux pas in the world, which is to ask this enormously successful author the name of his agent. And Mr. Haley was very gracious, probably because I fed him well. And he did give me the name of his agent. Tom, my husband, and I did not know that this was quite the faux pas it was, but next thing I went to New York and I met his agent. She was lovely. She agreed to represent me, not because she liked anything I had done, but because she respected Alex Haley. So she represented me on a couple of books. And then she and her husband got a divorce. They had no children. So the whole custody battle was over the literary agency. The judge awarded him the agency and she was out. So she was no longer my agent. I stayed with that agency for many years and was just assigned somebody else there who was very nice and very pleasant. But he went through a midlife crisis and no longer was interested in representing me. So I had to go back to New York and find another agent. And I did. And I've worked with her now for about 25 years. And she's reached a point where she finds me very boring and she's no longer interested in doing much for me. So we've reached kind of a nice agreement where I kind of find my own way and she negotiates the contract for me. So that is the point, is an agent is very helpful in negotiating a contract to get the best terms for you, because unless you are a literary attorney, you probably don't know what the best terms are for you. You don't know what's negotiable. You don't know what you're willing to give up in terms of future sales, like movies, television series, any other kind of digital thing. I don't know about those things, so that's what an agent is useful for. But you can get things published without an agent and just sending them over the transom to the major publishers. The problem with that is that you may wait months and months to get a response, and you may never get a response. If they're interested, they'll let you know right away that they want you to send more. If they're not interested, you probably will never even hear from them. And that's maybe that's an experience some of you have had. When my current agent stopped being interested in me, I then started trying to find another agent and have been totally unsuccessful doing that, even with a good track record. And I hate to say this because I'm not one of the people that looks for these kinds of things, but I really think it has to do with ageism, because I think the agents realize that I'm in my 70s and that I probably don't have 25 more books ahead of me. So it may not be worth their time financially to represent me. So I'm sticking with what I've got and hoping for the best. If you are looking for an agent and also looking to get something published, I would suggest that you go both routes at the same time. Because if you do it sequentially and you take 5 years to find an agent, that's 5 years you've wasted that you may not have gotten something published. So I would say try to do both at once. Let's talk about self-publishing. As I mentioned, I'm the wrong person to talk to about that. I don't think it's a really good idea. It may be the only outlet somebody has. And the reason it doesn't work for me is I write for children as young as 3rd grade up through high school. And in order to get, well, about 90% of all the books for children are bought by schools and libraries. They cannot buy books for schools that are not reviewed by major journals. And self-published things, it's very, very difficult to get them reviewed in major journals. So I'm sticking with the national publishers. But I did make one attempt. I did this book. Here's a copy of it. I did this book because nobody else wanted to publish it, and I really believed in it. And I thought I would try to see what would happen if I published it on Amazon. It's been about 3 years. It may have sold 100 copies, maybe, probably not even that many. And I thought that because I already had a reputation, that people would then turn to this book on Amazon. Nobody. I mean, it's been at least a year since anybody has bought any one copy even of it. So I would not, I mean, you have to pay to get things published independently like that. Whereas real publishers out there in New York and so forth, they pay you, which is kind of nice. So as long as you can find a reputable publisher who is interested in your work and willing to pay you, go for it. Oh, and I wanted to mention something else about agents. I forgot to say this. Please do not ever get tangled up with an agent that asks you for money. Because if they're, sometimes it's very enticing. They say, I'm really interested in your novel and I know I could get it published for you. If you will send me $500, that will be my expenses to get it sent out and so on and so on. And I'll do a revision and so forth. So maybe they'll do a little bit of revising and then they'll call you again or email you and say, I need another $250 just to come, so it goes on like that. A reputable agent does not ask you for money. A reputable agent takes between 10 and 15% of whatever you earn. So you don't ever have to pay anything to them. They automatically take it out of your royalty. Now, Gretchen asked me maybe to talk about what publishers are looking for. The truth is, I don't have a clue. They're not looking for what I want to write. So that means I might have to write something that they are looking for. The only clues I do have about what publishers are looking for come from reading Publishers Weekly newsletter online. It's free, it's very helpful, gives lots and lots of information about children's publishing. There's the adult Publishers Weekly, and then there's also the Children's Publishers Weekly, and it tells whatever books have been accepted for publication that week. So all this that I'm going to talk to you about, I really draw from that. What they're looking for is a lot of diversity. Now I'm looking at the people that I see here, and I see that we're all white people. What they're looking for is Asians, they're looking for African Americans, they're looking for Muslims, they're not looking for mainstream religious people, they're not looking for regular white folks who used to be the real bed of all literature for children. They are looking for diversity, and which is good in one sense. It's very good in many senses because it does give children an opportunity to read books written by and about people who are like them, who have their life experiences, who look like them, and so forth. The disadvantage is it's really hard for the rest of us to get things published at this time. Now, eventually, if we're in it long enough, the tide turns, and at some point they will say, okay, we've got a good cross-section of diversity, maybe we could now look at other folks. So there's that to think about. There's a lot written now about LGBTQ people, trans people, and so forth. You will find in almost every book for teens, even younger teens, there is going to be a person who is gay or who is trans or is questioning his or her sexuality or gender. It's just a really common theme now in literature. So if you're good at doing that kind of thing, you're in solid. The disadvantage of doing books that have those kinds of characters is that it's hard to get them by the censors at schools, because teachers and librarians are sometimes worried that those subjects are going to be challenged by parents in the school, and particularly in more conservative areas such as Kansas, for example, and Ohio, where I live now. I lived in New Mexico. Things were much more liberal in New Mexico, but this is where I am now. A lot that's being published now is fantasies, especially medieval type fantasies, especially series of these kinds of fantasies, where there's, as I mentioned before, a lot of really dark stuff. A lot of graphic novels. Now, in my day, graphic meant it had some naughty stuff in it. But that's not what they mean by graphic today. What they mean now is pretty much novels without words. A lot of pictures that look like cartoonish characters, maybe a few words here and there, but basically the story is told in pictures. Well, I'm not an artist, maybe you are, maybe you're not, but I don't know, call me old-fashioned. I think a book needs words, but hey, that's because I'm in my 70s. And then having said all of that about the things that are being written that maybe some of us may or may not be comfortable with, there's always room for a good, well turned out ghost story. Kids love to read ghost stories. I never thought I could write such a thing. Scholastic sent me an idea for a ghost story about some dolls that refused to stay buried. And I thought, this is the most preposterous idea in the world. I can't possibly do this. But it was fun, and I did it. And kids ate that book up like crazy. And the state of Oklahoma chose it as their book of the year. And so Scholastic said, oh, do another one just like that. And they gave me another totally preposterous concept, which I wrote. And that one was published, and now I'm through doing those for a while. But it's fun, you know, it's easy, it's fun. Who was it? Sandra, I think, talked about years and years of research for a ghost story. You know, you can whip it out in like a year. So that's easy. Okay, now some no-nos and some yes-yeses. How are we doing on time? Are we okay? Okay. Some no-nos. Don't talk down to children. We shouldn't have to say that, but sometimes we do have to think about that because we're older, we're wiser, we know better, and sometimes we, you know, it's the equivalent of getting down on your knee and talking to a child face to face, which I think is demoralizing for a child to begin with. So I think we need to, as children's authors, we need to respect their intelligence, their emotional insight. We need to trust them to draw their own conclusions without our moralizing, without our teaching them this is, you know, this is the message you're supposed to get from the book. This is not what we do as children's authors. We trust them to take away from the book what they need and what they understand without the author telling them. We want to avoid outrageous coincidences that tie up the loose threads in the solution of the story. Very tempting to do that. You get through the whole book and you've got some stuff left over and you're not sure what you're going to do with that to make the story really congeal. And then you can say, two things came together. Isn't it amazing? They ran into each other at the hardware store and that resolved the whole thing. Well, obviously kids are not going to accept that. And along that same line, when you set up a fantastical premise or a scene, please don't say, and then she woke up and it was all a dream. We read that in books all the time, don't we? But kids feel cheated by that. They want to know how and why did it happen, not because it was just a dream. If you're interested in doing picture books, I would recommend, and I've had no success with picture books at all. Everything I've ever sent as a picture book has been rejected. But if you are interested in doing that, send the text without illustrations. The publisher wants to hire their own artist to do the illustrations, which may or may not work for you. And the best books, I think, have the artist and the writer actually working in collaboration. But basically, if you think you're a good artist and you want to send your illustrations with the book, that minimizes your chances of getting the story accepted. So if they like your story, and then you could say, you know, I'd like to send you my portfolio, here's what I can do, that might work for you. but originally just send them the story, follow the correct format, which of course you can find online anytime. You wouldn't send anything to an editor or publisher without carefully seeing what other things they're publishing. I'll give you an example. I've been working with a wonderful editor. She does not like anything supernatural. So obviously, I'm not going to send her any ghost stories. She wants books that have social action themes. So that's what I'm going to send her. And I'm not going to waste her time. She's not going to waste my time reading some other things that don't fit what she believes in, which is not necessarily what the whole publishing company believes in, but that's her particular interest. I don't have to tell you to be careful with the spelling and the grammar and so forth. I'll tell you this, hopefully I'll be able to tell this quickly. Years ago, when I used to visit the Rockwell Library, one of the oh, hi, Mike, is that you? Hi, hey.
Hi, Lois. I'm sorry it took so long. Tom.
Welcome. And Tom is here too. Wave, Tom, he's here. Okay. So I used to visit the Rockwell Library, and one of the librarians there nabbed me and said, I have a patron who is interested in writing books, and she was wondering if you would look at one of her manuscripts. So I'm thinking, okay, it's a picture book, maybe 20 pages or so. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. So she sends it to me in the mail. It is a 300-page manuscript. Okay. And the title is, I Should Have Took the Dog. So I called her right away and I said, you know, there are some reasons for putting grammatical errors in books, you know, for specific purposes, but I'm curious to know why you put that in the title of the book. And she said, what error was that? And I said, well, I should have took the dog. She did not get it. So I said, I want you to go to a community college and take an English grammar class and then write your book, and then I'll be glad to read it. So we want to watch this. Now, swear words, potty words, and so forth, they're in kids' books all the time now, but we just have to decide for what age is that word appropriate and what is the context of that word. And an example of that is somebody mentioned my book, Steal Away Home. It does have the N word in it. I have had kids confront me on that and ask why I would put that word in the book. They're really disturbed by the word in the book. And I say, look at the time, it's the 1850s. Look at the context. Look at whose mouth that word is in. And it was in the mouth of an evil sheriff who was out to capture runaways who had been enslaved. And I said, I would not use that word casually. I would not put that word in the mouth of somebody in just, you know, in interesting conversation. You have to look at the context. And then kids would understand, why am I getting this huge picture of Mike? I'm looking at, wow. So carefully decide when you put swear words, blasphemous words, culturally inappropriate words, decide the age for which that particular passage is intended and carefully discern whether it's going to work or not. And we already talked about one of the no-nos, which is don't ask an author for the name of their agent or editor. Now, I want to go to sharing the screen again. If I do this right. Okay, So I'm not particularly interested in formulas, but I have found one formula that is very helpful. It's a big, broad thing, and I'll show you if I do this right, you'll see it. There, okay. This is a really helpful formula for writing a children's book. It's not, it doesn't feel formulaic. It's just basically what you put in a book. So who is your main character? What does he want? You'll excuse me if I use a male pronoun. I have not evolved to the point of using them as a singular. So please forgive me. So what does your main character want most? What does that person desire, need, goals, ambitions, and so forth? What stands in the way of his getting what he wants or needs most? What are the stumbling blocks, the barriers? Other people, maybe it's time that is the stumbling block. What will he do to get what he wants? So that's where your action, your plot moves forward, the momentum in the story. What's he going to do? But equally important, what will he not do to get what he wants? So what are his fears or his inhibitions, his moral limits? And then ultimately, why should we care? Why would anybody care about what happens to this character? So we need to make the character lovable enough or interesting enough or hateful enough or whatever that we care about what he does or what happens to him. And then, of course, just dress it up with a good setting of time and place and colorful language and imagery and distinctive dialogue, which we're going to talk about later, and you have a good story. See, so it's just a skeleton to hang your story on, and it doesn't have to be in this order at all. Okay, a few things about the worst and best parts of writing for children. Okay, we can turn this off, I think, or I'll leave it there so you can see it. The worst things about writing for children: getting past the gatekeepers, that is the editors who haven't been around kids or in a school in a long time. Getting around the teachers and librarians who worry about the content that will offend some parent and cause a kerfuffle in the school. And that creates great issues in a school. And we don't need to go into all that, but it is a barrier. We talked about the interminable waiting for responses from agents and editors and maybe no response at all. Dealing with rejection. This is something we all encounter over and over again. I get things rejected as often now as I did when I first started writing. And each time it hurts. Each time I get mad. And then the next day I think about it a little bit. And then I start to look at it and see, why did that editor reject that particular manuscript? And what do I need to do to get it better? But I have to go through that process. If I just look at it and I just get depressed about it, that thing is going to go, as I said, in the piano bench and never come out again. So it takes a process to deal with the rejection. One of the worst things is having people draw conclusions about who you are based on the characters that you write about. And I've had that happen a few times. You have little control over what goes on the jacket of the book. And I'm going to show you an example. This book, Steal Away Home, came out, I don't know, I think 1970, what year did it come out? 1975. And it had this beautiful jacket that was designed by a real artist. And each character is distinctive in it. And the coloring is perfect.
It was 1994.
1994. Oh, yeah. My first book came out in 75. This one came out in 1994. Okay, you're right. So I really liked this jacket. When the book was accepted by the state of Georgia as part of their Civil War curriculum, they came up with a new cover. And I don't even have a copy of it here, but it had just a girl's face on the front of it, just sort of, like a nice looking girl, but it didn't have this kind of detail. And then it started selling a lot of copies in Georgia. So they came out with a new cover, which is this stupid looking thing. They're doing more and more books with cartoonish looking characters. So they put this anorexic girl on the cover that has virtually nothing to do with the story. But I had no control over what goes on the cover. And that's a tough thing to deal with. I don't have any control over what goes on the blurb, the back of the cover, or the thing that describes what the story's about. The publisher does all that, and I don't get to decide whether I like it or not. Bad reviews, that's like rejection. You read bad reviews and you think, nobody's ever going to love this book. The thing about bad reviews is you have to remember that sometimes there are good reviews, and you can't believe the bad ones and the good ones, and so pay no attention to the reviews. The only people who care about the reviews are the editors and the librarians who buy the books. But authors should not pay attention to the reviews because it can get very discouraging. Then I asked my husband, you may see him in the background here. He's that good looking guy back there. Okay. I asked him, what is the worst thing about living with an author? Well, he could go on for days about that, but I asked him to just come up with two things. And he said, there are two very opposite things. The first is when the author has a dry spell, when she can't write, either because there are other things interfering, or there isn't time, or there's crisis or something else, and she has to put the writing aside. That's the really hardest part. But the opposite is also true. When the writer is so deeply in her space, in her head, in her zone, that she doesn't want to come out, she doesn't want to fix dinner, she doesn't want to be pleasant, she doesn't want to do anything but continue writing. That's pretty hard for the person who lives with that writer. But the best things about writing for children. I spend untold hours in libraries, swimming in my natural medium, researching subjects that fascinate me. I keep company in my mind with the very people who intrigue me most, even people that I love to hate. I can make them do whatever I want them to do, and they can't fight back. I play with my favorite toys, words and images, which have no sharp edges and are non-caloric. They're acid-free. They're plant-based nutrients for my soul. I get to see my book on a library shelf. But of course, when I walk into the library, a school library in particular, and they've got my book on the shelf, my first thought is, wow, there's my book. And my second thought is, why isn't it checked out? I get fan mail from readers, even parents or aunts whose kids are now reading the book they read when they were kids. That's the advantage of being an old lady writer, is you get a second and maybe even a third generation of people reading your books. I visit schools and work alongside the most creative and dedicated teachers. I get to work with kids whose minds are still open, who haven't yet lost the native ability to express themselves in fresh words and images. And the best part is I'm in and out of those schools in a day, so I never have to deal with grades or discipline or parents or yard duty. Who wouldn't love this kind of work? And as a little departure, here are the top 10 most annoying questions or comments that I've ever received. You ready for this? Number 10, when are you going to grow up and write a real book, meaning an adult novel? This is how little people respect children's books. Number 9, tell me what your book's about. I have to turn in a book report tomorrow and I don't have time to read it. Number 8, speaking of time, if I only had time, I know I could write a great children's book. Which is like saying, if I had a wrench and an oil can, I could be a crackerjack mechanic. Number 7, how many books do you write in a week? Number 6, and I heard some of you say you've been working for years on particular titles. Number 6, your book is too good to waste on kids, as if kids didn't deserve the best we can provide. Number 5, with television and computers and Xboxes and all, children don't read books anyway, do they? Well, ask R.L. Stein, the Goosebumps guy. He has sold 400 million books. J.K. Rowling has sold 500 million books. Think about Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time. Her book was rejected 26 times, and it has sold 14 million copies. Somebody is reading books. Somebody is reading these books. Number 4, I haven't read your book, but I read Anne of Green Gables way back when I was a kid. And if you ask me, nothing's been worth reading since then. Number 3, I get a phone call from a close friend. Are you working? Oh, sorry. I'll only keep you a minute. Yada, 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 and 20 minutes drag by. Number 2, I'd love to read your book. Would you send me a free autographed copy? I wouldn't believe how many people do that. And number 1, and this is a slight exaggeration, and we did touch on this a little earlier. I've written a picture book modeled after The Sopranos with a hitman named Artie. The title is Artichokes 3 for $1. Would you be willing to read it and tell me what you think, and then tell me how to get it published, and then introduce me to your agent? I do get things like that. Before we wind up and go to our writing project, a few more things I want to talk about. Some final thoughts. Keep expectations realistic. There will be rejections. No one is an overnight sensation. A struggle is okay. Now, I have to tell you, our son, Jeff Ruby, wrote a book called Penelope March is Melting. It's a wonderful book. He sent it to an agent. The agent sent it to a publisher. It was accepted right off the bat. And he thought, my career is soaring. It's been 4 years and he has not had anything else accepted for publication. It didn't sell 1 million copies, so his editor was not interested in a second book. So I'm just saying, struggle is natural. It's okay. Eventually, look at Madeleine L'Engle, 26 rejections, and she finally got it published. I agree with what Judy Blume says. Do you remember Judy Blume? Did you read Judy Blume when you were young? Did you read it to your children? Read her books to your children? Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. Incidentally, she wrote that book 50 years ago, and it is now being made into a movie. Anyway, she said, I don't believe in writer's block. For me, there's no such thing as writer's block. Don't even say writer's block. Well, my husband coined a term that I think works really well. He calls it writer's pause, P-A-U-S-E, meaning you take a break and you dwell on something else that needs your heart and your mind, and then you're ready, and then the writing will flow again. Next, write for yourself. Write what interests or excites you, not for an audience. Then hope someone else will love it. But the obverse is also true. There is no shame in writing what will sell. Ghost stories, popular fiction, self-help books. You can do both literary and pop. There used to be a radio talk show in Chicago about books for young people. On one of those programs, an adult and a 14-year-old boy were debating the merits of Harry Mauser's book, I Love You, Stupid, about a boy's first sexual experience. The horrified adult said, you just don't understand how you can be influenced by a bad book. And the boy's response, that's only if you read weak. You have to read strong. So trust that young readers will read strong. So write strong, which brings us to a few questions that we need to ponder. Are there any subjects wholly inappropriate for 6-year-olds, for 12-year-olds, for 16-year-olds? Do we pay too much attention to social problems and dysfunctional families and not enough to happy families and carefree kids? Are there still carefree kids out there living in Ozzie and Harriet homes? Are cuss words or culturally pejorative words ever okay in children's books? We talked about that. Do they serve a purpose? And if so, how much is too much? Can you and your children or students or grandchildren read the book aloud without blushing or violating school rules? Should books for young people offer challenges to their intelligence and their ethical sensibilities? Or should we, in this era of moral relativism, tell them clearly what's right and what's wrong, since apparently no one else will? And how do we resolve the conflict over colliding rights? That is, the teacher's right to academic freedom versus the parent's right to monitor what his child reads versus the student's right and need to access information. These are all thorny questions. So at this point, I want to pause. I'd like us to, if we have time, do we have time to do a writing thing? Okay, but let me see if you have some questions first before we do the writing thing. So anybody who would like to comment or ask a question or argue with me about something, now's the time. I'd love to hear from you.
Lois, do you want to talk a little bit about your process?
Connie, you have to unmute yourself.
I said, can we stop the share screen so maybe we can make you a little larger on our view?
Can I make this larger? I don't know how to do that.
Lois, just, are you going to show the other 3 slides later?
Yeah, the other slides are probably not going to be much larger than this, but
No,
we'll see.
no,
how.
that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
What's the name of your children's book about the dolls?
What about it?
What is the name of that book?
The Doll Graveyard. I never expected boys to read that book because it has the word doll in it. Boys eat it up just like girls do. Anybody else?
Lois, maybe you want to stop sharing your screen and then you can go back to sharing it when we're ready to do some writing. Good, that's good.
Okay.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your process of writing? You read one interview with you which talked about the character is the most important thing, that you start with your character and then you're not sure where it's going, but the questions you gave us help you to get there. You want to talk a little bit about process?
Yes, I always start with a character who really intrigues me. And I go through a process of asking that character about 150 questions. I interview that character to find out what her background is, what's the last book she ever read, who's in her family, what scares her the most, what does she want to do in 5 years from now. I ask every possible question you can imagine as if I were interviewing her for an article. And then that tells me when that character lived or lives, in what context, what year, what place, based on the kind of information that he or she gives me. And then I drop the character and start the research. And I do a lot of research. Sometimes I do 2 and 3 years of research before I ever start writing the book. In the meantime, in the back of my mind, I've got that character functioning in the time and place that I'm researching. And then I go back to the character and I just let her tell me the story. Now, that's the first draft. The second draft requires really destructuring the entire thing and starting from scratch and making it the best I can and rewriting it dozens of times. But the first process is always very organic. and not at all analytical. Anybody else have a comment or question?
I would like to know, I mean, you write with different settings. So do you visit all of the places that you write, I mean, that you set your story in, or do you basically do that through research, a combination of both? What would you recommend there?
Combination of both. Um, I try to visit any place I write about. I mentioned that in about a year and a half or so, I've got this book coming out about the Salem witch trials. Now, obviously, I could not go back to 1692 and interview anybody, but we did spend quite a lot of time in Salem and the area all around there, just getting a feeling for what it was like, what the weather's like, what the crops are like. So yes, visiting the place is very important if you possibly can. I did one book a long time ago about Jamestown. I wasn't, it was a very short window of time that they needed a turnaround. I didn't have time to go and visit. I did that based on research. But it's always better if you can visit the place. Anybody else? Comment, question, thoughts?
How did you get your relationship with Scholastic?
I had a long-standing relationship many years ago. I wrote a book called Miriam's Well, and they published that book. And then they asked me to do another book. They asked me to do a book about the skinhead movement. And I did that one for Scholastic. And then they were not interested in anything else I did until maybe 20 years later when they asked me to do the ghost stories. So it's just a question of they come to you and they say, here's what we need, can you do it? And you do it if you're interested and you want to. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Hello, this is Mike. Can you hear me?
Mike, you're stuttering out.
Am I? Is that, no,
I'm getting every.
that's okay. I was wondering what Tom was doing in the back of the. I was just wondering what Tom's doing.
Directing a question.
I thought he had a phone asleep.
Yeah, Mike, I'm seeing you as like 3 different participants. That might be why we're getting echo.
That could be. I've tried about 20 times.
Okay,
If you want to put your question in the chat, if that's easier for any of you, we can do it. We can read the questions, or Lois can read them from the chat. This is a terrific opportunity to ask any questions.
I'm looking at the chat. Marilyn's question. It is my understanding that potential agents will not accept books the writer is trying to go the indie publishing route. Correct. They are not interested in anybody who's doing the indie publishing. They don't get any money out of it. The only way they make money is if publishers pay you and they take 15% of what they pay you. So that's my understanding also. They would not be interested. Who was it that published your book about the tools that wouldn't stay buried? It's dolls, not tools, dolls that wouldn't stay buried. That was Scholastic. And then the next, what was the name of the book about the dolls? Okay. Anybody else have a question before we?
Yes.
Yes.
As you're doing your research, do you find it most helpful to do library research of nonfiction books, or to do research of authors who have written fiction in the time, or to hit museums or historical societies? What seems to be, I mean, I know that all of those are good sources, but what seems to be the most helpful for you?
I will tell you, the very first thing I do is I read the best children's book I can find on the subject set in that time, because it will explain the basic information you need to know in accessible terms. And it will also, if it's nonfiction, even sometimes if it's fiction, it will have a bibliography that will get you started looking for more. But yes, all of the things you described are necessary if you can do them. But there are some people who aren't able to travel to museums or travel to other parts of the country. You can get so much information from books, from journals, from videos. But I always tell kids, don't count on the internet being the final source on everything. It's only a start. And you can't convince kids that that isn't everything they need to find with teachers and librarians.
Okay, I have one other question, and that is language. I have found while writing this that teenager was not a term that was used back then in the 1850s. I have found just a variety, like even skedaddle wasn't used until 1880. You know, how important is that language integrity, and what is the best way to make sure you have that language
Let's
integrity?
ask that. First of all, a word like teenagers and so forth, you're right, it wasn't used way back then. In fact, they didn't even have a concept of adolescence then. So I think the most valuable resource is the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, I don't own a copy. I think it's like 44 volumes or whatever. I don't own the whole thing. I can get it at the library, but I do have a 2-volume abridgment that has been very, very helpful because it tells you if that word you're looking for happens to be in the abridgment, it tells you when that word came into the language and what was its national origin and how has the use changed over the time that we've lived. And I find that to be tremendously helpful.
Well, I find that I throw in these words and I don't realize that they are not
Right.
appropriate. And it's just a real, I mean, because they're just a part of your everyday language. Okay was another one that I had to learn not to use.
But hopefully your editor will find those because what you don't want is to have an anachronism show up in your story and have some smart aleck kid saying, you know, there was no such thing in 1854. So you and your editor will look very carefully at any word that has even the slightest possibility of being anachronistic.
That's what I thought. And I think it's a way of teaching the kids how language has changed.
Yes, right. Okay, so you have been very patient with me, and I do want us to have some time to work on a little writing prompt, if you would like to. If you're not comfortable doing that, that's okay with me. But what I would like to work on is dialogue, because I think dialogue is essential in children's books. We don't want long bits of narration. We don't want long bits of history. We don't want all kinds of description. We want things to move along quickly. And dialogue is so important in character development because it tells us the age, the educational level, the geographic origin, the emotional status, the nature of a relationship, just in the way people talk to each other. So when we're writing dialogue, we want to look for certain things. Watch for questions. How challenging is something that the person says, and how does the other person, the responder, how does the responder react? Does the responder get what the first person is saying, or is the first person hiding behind something else? Think about what that person says and what that person doesn't say, and why does that person not say what we thought that person would say. Maybe he's trying to protect himself. Maybe he's trying to deceive the other person. There are various reasons why people don't say what we think they're going to say in dialogue. We don't want to waste any words. Give each word in the dialogue the heft that it deserves to carry your story. So just go out and take out every word that says, oh, I'll tell you something. Mark Twain once said, every time you write the word very, she was very pretty or it was very late. He said, substitute that with the word damn. And then your editor will automatically cross out the damn and then you don't need more very. So I thought that was pretty clever. So we don't want to waste words in dialogue. We want each word to be of some importance.
Where are the adverbs?
Well, adverbs, yeah. You all know, get rid of as many adverbs as you possibly can. Is the character aware of the impact of his words? Does he care about the impact? Does he intend to wound or deceive, whatever? And this one is one that I've come to believe over the years. Dialogue is about power. It is always about power. And think about that. In a dialogue, I know we may have a chance to look at this, but I think the print is going to be too small for you to really grasp this. But think about that in a dialogue. If 2 or even 3 people are speaking, and we don't bother calling it a trialogue, but we just use that generic term dialogue for conversation. Power is rising and falling as each person speaks. Who has control over that scene based on what he or she says? So let me just give you an example. I'm thinking of this as a dialogue between a mother and a son, and 3 different ways of looking at this. Okay, so the mother says, we're going for a walk in the park at midnight. And the son, starry-eyed, says, how romantic is that, Mom? I'm finally going to ask her to marry me. Okay, that's one form. The second one, the mother says, you think you're going for a walk in the park at midnight? You're 10 years old. Just try slipping out of this house, Buster. And the son, in rage, says, you never trusted me, Mom. You don't want me to grow up. Same scene, okay. Third one, the mother says, y'all are walking in the park at midnight? Midnight? Me, I love a brisk morning walk to get the blood pumping. And the son, chuckling, says, yeah, Mom, because by midnight, you're conked out drunk on hooch every night. So same 2 characters, same scene about the walk at midnight, but the way the dialogue is portrayed, the speaker, the responder, and so forth, very, very different. Choice of the words, where the emphasis is placed, and so forth. So if we can, okay, let me just get to this one thing and see if I can do this right. I am so bad at this. Okay, can you see? Let's see, it starts. There, you can see that, right? This is what I call ping pong dialogue, which we never want to do. You cheated. Did not? Yes, you did. I never cheat. I saw you. You saw wrong. I'm never wrong. Now, we have no idea who's speaking. Male, female, other, young, old. What do we know for sure about these characters? Nothing. Who's in charge of this scene? How do they feel? What did the accused cheater cheat on? We don't know anything. Now, if the next one is big enough for you to see it, can you see that? Can you read that? Okay, so this is a 3-part play, which I have done with a lot of kids in classes. And let's see if we have to get this off of here. Okay. This is a scene in a classroom. I need actors, okay? I need 3 people. I need a narrator, I need the teacher, Mrs. C, and I need a student named Jerry. Are you ready to be actors? Who's going to be the teacher?
I can be the teacher.
Martha will be the teacher. Who's going to be the narrator? Did I see Amy's hand up? No.
Yeah, I can be the narrator.
Okay. And who's going to be Jerry? The student, could be male or female. Who wants to be Jerry? Somebody has to be Jerry. do I have to call Tom in to be Jerry?
I'll be Jerry.
Wayne will be Jerry.
Okay. Are we
Mrs.
good,
C.
everybody? Okay. So now I will be interrupting you all along the way to demonstrate how this works. Okay. So starting.
San- Lois, we need somebody from Mrs. C. How about Sandy?
I thought.
Yeah,
Mrs.
Martha's Mrs. C.
Is the teacher.
Who is Mrs. C?
I'll be
Martha.
Mrs. C.
Mrs. C is Sandra, right? Right. Okay.
I didn't think so, but I'll do it.
All right. So the narrator starts. Go ahead.
Glancing away, Jerry handed the smudged test paper to Mrs. Colvin. She studied it over the top of her glasses.
Okay,
You
Mrs. C,
Okay, sorry.
what does she say?
You cheated.
Okay, now the start of this story. Who has the power in this scene? Automatically.
Teacher.
Automatically.
Mrs. C.
Mrs. C, why? Because she's the teacher. She has the power, okay? So she says, you cheated. And Jerry says,
No, I
Jerry?
didn't. Honest.
okay, do you think Jerry's telling the truth? Do we know?
Probably not.
Did Jerry, well, we don't know for sure, do we? Yet? Do we know for sure? Do we
No,
have reason to believe that Jerry's telling the truth? Just
no,
on the basis of what he said,
no. Just his age.
maybe? All right. Mrs. C, what does she say?
Jerome.
Okay, now notice, she
Huh?
didn't call him Jerry, did she?
No, it's Jerome. Okay.
Which
Jerome.
means,
I saw you leaning on Melissa Barker's paper.
okay, so by calling him by his formal name, she's reestablishing right there, I am in charge and you are in trouble. Okay, now Jerry, what does Jerry say?
Busted.
Yeah.
No way. I was just tying my shoes.
Oh, now we're beginning to suspect something because he's whispered busted, okay. And he says he's tying his shoes. Was he telling the truth?
No,
Was he cheating? Was he looking at Melissa Barker's paper? Or was he looking at his shoes? What do you think? We
I
don't
think
know.
it's like a paper.
So narrator, what happens now?
4 eyes settled on Jerry's feet, toes wiggling in his sandals. A triumphant smile.
Wait a minute. Was he tying his shoes?
Nope.
Because
he had on sandals.
he
Yeah.
was wearing sandals. Okay. So now Jerry's power is really sinking because he's being caught not only as a cheater, but probably as a liar. And so the teacher's power is rising. So go ahead, narrator. What happens here?
A triumphant smile flickered across Mrs. Colvin's leathery cheek.
Aha, okay. And she says,
Oh, Jerome, you cannot lie to an old veteran like me.
and Jerry says,
I ain't lying.
uh-oh. So he's not only cheated, and he's lied about lying, and he's used bad grammar. His power is going into the toilet, and hers is coming up. Okay. And then what happens, narrator?
He tried for one last stab at saving his skin. It was bold, but worth the risk.
Go ahead,
You're
Jerry.
wrong, Mrs. Colvin.
Do you dare say that to the teacher? You're wrong. Uh-oh.
Nope.
This guy is in so much trouble. And she says what?
Wrong, Jerome. In 37 years of teaching, I have never been wrong.
Narrator,
She wrinkled her brow.
Mrs. C.
Did I say 37 years? And that's not right. Why, it's been 38 years.
Oh, wait a minute, I lost it. Hold on. Okay, I'm trying to get the pictures moved. There, okay. All right, Go ahead. So she says, did I say, would you say that again, please? Did I say 37 years?
7 years? That's not right. Why, it was 38 just last week.
And what does Jerry say? Jerry?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So now he's got her, right? Okay, so the power is shifting again because he's caught her in something being wrong and he's thinking, okay, I'm king now. And then, narrator, what
He
is he?
floated his test paper onto the pile, cluttering Mrs. Colvin's desk.
Feeling really important here, okay? All right. And Mrs. C, because she's the teacher, she has to recapture the power in this conversation. So what does she say?
Your feet could profit from a good washing, Jerome Wallace. Dismissed.
Okay, so she's caught him in lying and so on and so forth, but he's gotten the better of her. So now she's doing an attack on his dirty feet, calling him not just Jerome, but Jerome Wallace, and then the ultimate insult in one word, dismissed. You don't count. Goodbye. So she has recaptured her power. You see what I'm getting at? So here's what I'd like you to do if you've got paper and pencil. This is what I call power shifting dialogue, and then we're going to look at it as, okay, if I can do this. I don't want to stop. Oh, I have so much trouble with this. Okay, wait a minute. Stop the share and I'll do it again. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Why is my slide not coming up? Oh gosh. All right. Why is any of you who are
Can you bring it up again? Can you click on the
slide not coming up?
slideshow? Or go back?
Oh, there we go. Okay, okay. So here's what task I'm putting you to, if you will. This is what I call triangulated dialogue. So a character you've been working with and another character of your choosing meet at a party. To their shock, they discover that they both love or detest a third person who is also at the party, but neither of them knows about the other. So it can be any of these possibilities, and you can look at these at your own time. So give each character a name, a bit of background, and thumbnail sketch, just a little bit. Then write the conversation that occurs among the three when they meet around the punch bowl. What emotions are awakened? And here's a whole list of possible emotions. And how does the power shift? So let's take about maybe 7 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back together. And if somebody wants to share what they've written, we would love to hear it, and then we'll wind up. Okay, go to it. People, let's see if you can wind it up in about a minute and a half or so. Okay. So, what do you think, folks? So would somebody like to share what you've done?
I'll be glad to share.
Are you? Okay.
Just because I have something I'm trying to edit it a little bit. I'm finding it doesn't all make sense, but we'll go with what I have.
Okay.
Okay. So good to see you today. Amy greeted Sarah as she shuffled past her, guiding her children toward the children's church entrance. Amy turned toward Jane, who was walking in her direction toward the sanctuary. My, but you look pretty today. Did you see Sarah's outfit? How could one miss it? Jane smirked in her direction. I mean, she always wears such colorful outfits. Amy placed her hand on Jane's arm. I guess you could call them that. Personally, I wouldn't be caught dead in such a getup. Poor soul needs your guidance to help to save her from such social faux pas. Jane glanced over Amy's shoulder. Here she comes. Go see what you can do to give her a clue on how to dress for church. I'm embarrassed to say I know her.
Excellent. Okay, good. Wow, you can get a lot in just a few minutes. Okay, who else would like to share? Anybody? It's okay if you don't want to. I always tell kids when I do writing workshops in school, your writing is your personal possession. It's up to you to decide whether or not you want to share it. I would never intimidate anybody into sharing something they've written, particularly something that you haven't had a chance to revise 20 times. So unless we have somebody else who would like to read, I think probably the best thing to do is for us to conclude. And if you have a meeting, some things you have to do afterwards when I'm gone, please do whatever you need to do.
Lois, would you be willing to critique a little bit what Sandy did, and if anybody else would like to read theirs?
Wait, I didn't.
Could you critique a bit of? Could you show what
I don't critique people.
Okay, okay.
No. I mean, the only way I would critique people is if we were sitting in a critique group where we could really look at everything in context and really carefully go through it. Otherwise, I would not do that to anybody.
I just need some little more help understanding the paring down of the dialogue. Can I read what I wrote? And
I'd love to hear it, sure.
Robert is a grad student in history at Northwestern University. At a party that his dean hosts for grad students, he meets Lacey, who is also a history student. What is your area of interest? I don't know yet. I think I should know by now, but so many things interest me. Yeah, and we can't all be like Cassandra. His voice was gritty, and he fixed his gaze across the room on their striking classmate with her broad afro and her ethnic jewelry. She was talking with their advisor and clearly comfortable with Dr. Johnson. Have you had a class with Cassandra? Lacey followed Robert's eyes to what appeared comfortable tete-a-tete. Yes, and she's awesome. She's really smart. But I feel like I'm shrinking when I'm with her. They moved toward the punch bowl, but Cassandra had moved there also. She looked past them. Tom, how was your trip? Excuse me. She pushed between Lacey and Robert and hugged the tall assistant professor behind them. Robert looked at Lacey, his voice barely a whisper. Do you think she's looking her way to a PhD?
How were you able to get all that out so quickly? Did you have it? I mean, did you plan in advance where the scene was going, or did it just?
No, I mean, it's the characters are actual characters I'm working with, but I haven't worked with them in that way. I haven't worked with them as I mean, because Robert, all I've done with Robert so far is he's a little wowed by Cassandra. He's both attracted by her, but also feels inadequate. That's it. But is that the kind of thing you're talking about where I mean, I'm trying to understand how the dialogue is pared down, and also so that it has a clear, it tells you things about the characters that are important.
Well, I think ideally, if we could just hear the character without any attribution, without any description, that would be ideal, but it doesn't work that way. Because a reader would not know, you would know if you're volleying back and forth between two characters who's speaking. A reader would lose it. So we have to do some attribution. I'm just saying, don't waste a lot of words on description, on ly words. He said it loudly instead of have him shout it. Use a verb instead of an adverb whenever possible. That's all I'm saying. I just, there's some dialogue that is going to be really rich and flowing, not so much in children's books. So I'm reading Connie's message here. Thanks so much for being with us. Thank you. Thank you. She's had an emergency call. Oh, is she all right? So she's had an emergency call and need to leave. Thanks again for being with us. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me.
This has been a wonderful session. We've learned so much from you, and you spent so much time preparing. We're most grateful to you for what you've done for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. So Gretchen, we need to get together, the four of us on Zoom,
right,
whenever we can. And
right.
That's where we left off last time.
And you're getting thank yous in the chat.
Okay,
Um,
I'm gonna check off if you wanna go ahead and do whatever you do at your meetings.
Right, right.
But I want to say goodbye and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye.
Bye.
We actually, we have a few more minutes if we want more discussion of session or any other business. Sandy for taking charge of getting the material out to people about Lois's presentation. We should have this recorded, and hopefully I can send that to Amy or to Sandra, and we can put it up on our Facebook page or our D5 page. Sandy, you're muted.
There we go. It's still recording.
Yes. So anybody have any other business that you need to discuss, or Dwayne, do you have anything you need to share with us? Okay, we're down to 5 participants. I think you can all leave. I'm going to be the last to leave so I can keep the recording, store it for us. Thank you all for participating. We'll see you next month.
Yep.
Second Saturday.